Hi there guys, got a little two-part video series here for you today on the BSA R12. In the first video we're going to be making the shroud for the rifle, and then in the second we'll be concentrating on the moderator. We're going to be making the moderator slightly different than we normally do, and hopefully when the two pieces come together it'll make a nice little shroud and mod combo. The shroud itself is going to be 24mm in diameter, and we're going to be using carbon fibre for the shroud body. To start off with, we're going to be making the shroud end cap. So this will screw onto the barrel itself and allow us to screw a mod onto the end of it. We're going to be threading this end 1/2" UNF. So to start off with, we're turning the very end of the part down to 12.7mm. Once we've established the OD, we can put a final facing pass across the shoulder there, and then create a thread gutter for the threads to run into. The thread gutter just allows the threads to terminate nicely, as we wouldn't be able to thread right up to a shoulder. So a small thread gutter just finishes off the threads quite nicely. With that done, we can chamfer the end, then start threading the piece. We're going to be using a full form cutter, just taking nice shallow passes across the thread one at a time. Every now and again I'm checking our threads with a go gauge, just to make sure that everything's going to plan. The idea of a go gauge is that it should screw onto the threads nicely with very little play between the gauge itself and the threads. Now, you don't have to use a go gauge to test your threads. They are fairly expensive, and unless you're doing lots of the same thread, it's really not worth buying one. But you could just as easily use something threaded with your desired thread. But once we've got the threads cut to depth, we can take the part out of the lathe, insert a 1/2" UNF female mandrel into the chuck, then remount our shroud end cap. With our part securely mounted in the 1/2" UNF female mandrel, the next thing we can do is start work on this side. To begin with, we're going to be turning the OD down to 24mm. The next thing we can do is drill through the part. To begin with, we're going to be opening up one end to 10mm, about 30mm deep. This will be the location of our first baffle. Once we've done that, we can use a 4.5mm drill to create a pilot hole through the rest of the shroud. This hole here will be the path of the pellet, and it's critical at this stage to get a nice straight hole, so we're just taking it nice and carefully, clearing the chips at regular intervals. Once we've got our pilot hole established, we can come back through with a 5.2mm drill bit and just drill out the rest of the material. Now, this is a 177 rifle, and the nominal size of the pellet is around 4.5mm. We're drilling a 5.2mm hole, so we've got just over 1/4mm clearance between the pellet and the sides of the shroud. Now, the smaller that you make this hole, the quieter your shroud will be. Although in making the hole smaller, you do also run the risk of coming into clipping issues and stuff like that. But if you want a super quiet shroud, you need to make this hole nice and small. But with that done, the next thing we can do is mount a centre in the end, then finish the OD work. The first thing we're going to be doing is turning the OD down to 22mm for a tight fit in the carbon fibre tube. With that done, we can turn the end down to 16mm, and the step you see here is the location of our first baffle. Up next, we're swapping over to a part-off tool, and we're going to be removing the waste material between the shroud end cap and the first baffle. So we're just plunging out the material here, being nice and careful, as we do have a fair amount of material to remove. The final thing we can do is drill the end out to 11.5mm, then thread that 1/2" UNF using a nice sharp tap. With that all done, that's pretty much the lathe work complete. We can now move the piece over to the mill and finish out the baffle chambers. Now, I've got a slightly different setup this time than my usual collet block arrangement. What we're going to be doing first is drilling banks of 6 holes, spaced about 60 degrees from one another. To do this, we're going to be using what's called a spindexer. What this allows us to do is accurately rotate the part at 1-degree increments. I'm experimenting with holes rather than our usual slotting setup, just to see if it makes any noticeable difference in the noise of the rifle. My thinking is that the holes will force the air to slow down and act as sort of like a little brake, rather than allowing the air to expand too quickly and hit the side walls of the carbon fibre tube. Whether it will actually make any difference whatsoever is up in the air at the moment, but we're going to be trying it out for this project. With that done, I'll just move you over to the back of the spindexer and show you what we have to do. So as you can see there, we're on position number 18. We need to rotate 60 degrees to the next bank of holes. So we're going to be moving the dial round to the 24 location. So we've practically moved from 180 degrees to 240 degrees. And once we're in our location, we can use the pin to lock the position into place and then tighten down our little clamp. Next up, we can move on to the second baffle chamber, and this one we're just going to be slotting out. I didn't want the pellet travelling through a small hole for an extended period of time, so on this second baffle chamber we're using the slot method. To begin with, we've just centered ourselves up, and then we're drilling out most of the waste material using a 6mm drill bit. With that done, we can move over to a 3-flute 6mm carbide end mill, and then start plunging out the waste material. And we're plunging out to around 1/4 mm from the final dimension. So we've still got about 1/4 mm on each of the walls to clean up before we get to our final dimension. We do have to be careful at this point, as we are still only screwed onto the 1/2" UNF female mandrel, so there's no actual lock between the two pieces to stop it coming undone. So we're just taking real nice small light passes across each of the walls, cleaning up the waste material until we reach our final dimension. And then with the swarf removed, I'll just get you a final look at the finished walls. Now if you look real closely, you can actually see I missed the top left corner. I mustn't have come back far enough in the X direction to clean up that joint there. But luckily all I needed to do was come back through with the end mill and finish off that corner, so no big deal. The last thing we're going to be doing in this video is making the back cap for the shroud. Now this is going to be made out of Delrin, as there's less risk of scratching the barrel as you put the shroud on. Plus when it's all finished, you only really see the last 2mm of it, so there's no real reason to make it out of aluminium. This piece as well is going to be slightly different from a standard back cap in that we're going to be capturing a piece of stainless steel mesh in the back cap itself. What I plan to do is mill a number of slots in the carbon fibre tube so that when we insert the back cap you'll be able to see stainless steel mesh through the carbon fibre tube. This will just create a nice little decorative feature on the rear of the shroud, so we need to make the back cap a little longer than we would normally make one. To begin with, we're turning the OD down to 24mm, then turning the body of the back cap down to 22mm for a nice tight fit in the carbon fibre tube. With that done, we can swap over to a parting off tool and just create the undercut for the stainless steel mesh. This will just capture the mesh and keep it in place when we install it onto the rifle. The undercut itself is about 1mm deep, so about 1/2mm each side. The other thing we'll do whilst we've got the parting off tool is create the glue groove in the end of the piece. With that done, we can swap over to a chamfer tool and just put a chamfer on all of the edges and then start work on the internal features. The first thing we're going to be doing is drilling and boring this side out to 17mm. This will be clearance on the barrel. This clearance isn't all the way through. At one end we'll have a tighter section with a number of O-rings in it that will secure nicely around the barrel and keep it nice and centralised. With that done, we can face the end down to our required width, then put a nice chamfer on the very edge. Next thing we need to do is bore this end out to 15.75mm and then machine in 2 O-ring grooves. The O-rings we're going to be using are 16x2, so we do need to make the O-ring grooves themselves a little shallower to put a little bit of squeeze on the O-ring. The barrel itself is 15.5mm OD, so what we're going to be doing is touching off internally using our grooving tool and then coming in about 3.5mm. This will leave a 0.25mm squeeze on the O-rings, and that should be plenty good enough to secure around the barrel. And then once both the grooves are done, that's pretty much it for this part. Right then, with that all said and done, I'll just get you a quick look at the components and then I'll let you go. So this is the end, so that will screw onto the barrel like so, then our pellet will travel up the inside. This part here will be glued into the shroud to keep it nice and secure. Have a 1/2" UNF on the end, number of holes in this side to allow the air to escape nice and slowly. This has been tested, as you can see there's a fair amount of lead dust on the inside, and it does work really quite well. The shroud on its own isn't terribly quiet, however the piece itself is only about 70mm long, so it won't make the rifle super quiet on its own. However, the shroud paired with a mod is nice and quiet. Next part is the end cap, which is this piece here. As we said earlier, this turned down section will house stainless steel mesh. We'll wrap that round there we can secure it using some thread or something else, maybe some hot glue, into this groove here, so it will be nice and captive, and it should slide in the back of the shroud nice and easily. It does have a number of O-rings on the inside as well, which are a good fit on the barrel itself, and it really does work quite nicely when it's in the rifle. The last piece is the carbon fibre tube. So this was just cut off camera. I do all the carbon fibre cutting off camera because it does produce an awful lot of dust, and I don't want that dust getting in the camera. But all I do is cut it roughly by hand, just using a Dremel with a cut-off wheel. Then I put it in the lathe, grip it in the chuck, then use my tool post grinder to just cut the ends nice and square. I might show you a little bit of carbon fibre cutting when we make the moderator. The only thing I haven't done on this piece yet is cut the small slots in the end, which will expose the stainless steel mesh. I want to have a few external features on the moderator, so I want to match the number of features in the back here to the ones on the mod, but I haven't decided what I'm going to do yet, so we're leaving the actual carbon fibre blank for now. With that done, that's pretty much going to do it for this video. I'm not going to show you the shroud on the rifle just yet. To see that, you'll have to tune into the next episode. But I'll get the moderator done this week, so that should be coming nice and quickly next week. For now though guys, that's pretty much going to do it for this video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.